So I just got this comment from someone named Gina Ritchie that I wanted to respond to directly. It goes like this, and this is in response, by the way, to my video, Robin DiAngelo is probably the real racist. So Gina Ritchie says, the point of her critique is that yes, all white people are the real racists, but that almost all will die on a hill to deny it. Calling anti-racist the real racist is the intellectual equivalent of no, you're the doo-doo head. This Okay, I'm going to get through the whole thing before I say anything. Anyway, this rhetorical device of accusing your accusers of being the real criminal slash racist slash real sexist is straight from the Nazi propaganda playbook. Racists are not always stupid people because, as we all know, white people have access to better institutes of learning, which means better access to the job market and better housing. That is an example of how structural harm works to give white people the advantage to succeed. If you cannot accept that your quality of life is significantly improved because you are white, and if your life sucks, it's not because you're white, then your reason for accepting that white people who identify as some kind of white, around 10% of the human race, having almost all the power, most of the money, and calling all the shots in the world, must be that white people are superior to racialized people or deserve preferential treatment simply because they can. That is your white privilege working, which is rooted in white supremacy, which is the ideology that created the system of racism. So the inability or refusal to acknowledge that racism exists is one of the ways racism is perpetuated by white people for their own advantage, and one of the ways they do this is with white fragility, as exhibited in the comments above and below. Face it, boys, you are on YouTube watching other boys call anti-racist the real racist when you are actively involved in perpetuating white supremacy, and yes, you are the real racist. You just don't have the emotional tools to acknowledge that you aren't the real victim, which is another lift from the Nazi propaganda playbook, victimhood and persecution complex again. If you are online using arguments the Nazis used to legitimize the persecution of not only Jews but everyone who is not white, heterosexual, cisgendered, Christian, German nationalists, then you are probably the real Nazi too. Oh goodness. Okay, here we go. Okay, Gina, so what made me guffaw at that was this thing you say where it's like I'm saying, no, you're the doo-doo head. Okay, for me, think logically for a minute. For me to be saying that, it means that somebody else was initially saying you're the doo-doo head to me. So you think that it's acceptable to make the argument, but unacceptable to counter it. It's just as petty and immature on both sides, Gina. Now, what's being suggested here is not as petty and immature as you're a doo-doo head. It's you're a racist is a much more substantial argument and a much more important thing to consider. Okay, so Gina, the first thing that you need to understand, and this needs to be made patiently, the statement needs to be made patiently over and over again to you and people like you, because people like you are what would be described as ideologically possessed. You have come in here and demonstrated that you view and understand everything that's going on within the parameters of a specific ideology, and that anything outside your ideology or anything that challenges your ideology is not only further proof that your ideology is correct, but proof that you and your ideology are under attack. And when somebody demonstrates something like that, you would call it being ideologically possessed. So, this statement needs to be made, and it needs to be very well understood. Robin DiAngelo's claims are made on the basis of no academic research whatsoever, no scholarly study whatsoever. There is no basis for her claims other than her anecdotal evidence that she went to give a series of lectures, and people had a very, very negative response to those lectures that she gave. And from that negative response, she gleaned, which, by the way, and I'm doing a deconstruction series on White Fragility, the book that you can watch if you want, but I did the math and realized that these negative responses she was getting probably happened about 40 years ago. We've made a good deal of progress since then. But anyway, based solely on the fact that she got a consistently negative response to a series of to a series of lectures that she gave, she decided that all white people are racist. Okay, this holds absolutely, even if everything she's reporting is correct, it holds absolutely no water whatsoever. Occam's razor would dictate that logically the most likely thing that's happening is that Robin DiAngelo is not good at her job. You know, think about it, I'm a musician. If a musician goes out and gives a series of concerts that are always negatively reviewed, everybody in the audience is constantly booing, everybody in the audience is storming out, throwing fruit at the stage or whatever, you know, always a consistently negative response, and the musician says, oh, well, this is, people don't understand my brilliant music, and they don't understand good music, and people's tastes have gone so far downhill that they can't appreciate anything of quality. Which of these things is logically more likely, Gina? That the musician is really so brilliant that they're producing music absolutely nobody can understand because societal standards have fallen so low, or that this person, this musician, maybe is incompetent and is consistently generating a negative response. But Robin DiAngelo is apparently a PhD, so for some reason, on the basis of that and that alone, we are supposed to assume that she knows what she's talking about. Okay, back to my example. If the musician in question has a PhD and his playing still sounds like garbage and nobody wants to hear it, what's the most likely response? Argument from authority is a fallacy. It does not matter that Robin DiAngelo is an academic. An academic can still be wrong. Okay, so I will give you the difference between how Robin DiAngelo and I think before I get to deconstructing the remainder of your comment. In White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo has a segment where she talks about how she knows that she has deeply ingrained racist values because if she goes to a city park and she's supposed to meet a group of people that she doesn't know, if she walks up to that city park and sees, say, two picnic groups going on, and she sees a white group, ethnically white group, ethnically black group, she will look at those two groups and secretly hope that the white group is the one she's supposed to meet up with. And that's how she knows she has these deeply ingrained opinions. And she delineates from that everybody else must feel this way. Everybody else, she assumes everybody else must feel this way. Okay, first of all, I want to pump the brakes there. When I conclude my series on White Fragility, I'm going to go through and talk about, there's a book I have called Psychopath Free that lays out a good criteria for psychopathic behavior, and I'm going to, obviously I cannot diagnose Robin DiAngelo, I have absolutely no ability to do that, but I can point out where her behavior is and her beliefs are consistent with the actions of a psychopath. Two big things. One, crazy making. So psychopaths don't see themselves as causing psychopaths, because they have no ability to reflect and contemplate on their own actions, they have no ability to understand that they are the ones that are driving people crazy around them. So as far as the way a psychopath sees the world, they were presenting the information in a acceptable, palatable fashion, or they were behaving in a reasonable manner, and everybody just started blowing up and going crazy all around them for no reason. That is consistent with the way Robin DiAngelo interprets the negative response she gets to her lectures. A reasonable person would more likely say, what am I doing incorrectly here? She can't do that. She is incapable of perceiving any kind of fault with the way she does anything. The other thing, and this is getting to the example I'm using here, the other thing is that psychopaths assume that everybody else is thinking the same way they are. They don't have the ability to perceive other people. That's why they are so paranoid and so suspicious, because they assume that everybody else thinks the same way they do. And that is when Robin DiAngelo says that, well, she says, well, I feel this way, so everybody else must feel this way. That is completely consistent with that. And that, coupled with the fact that she has this perpetual 1,000-yard stare, kind of makes you start to wonder. And there's other examples I'll get into too. But here's the thing, Gina. Okay, just today, an example from my life to counter that example. Just today, I'm in the process of buying a new car. And I went out to the car place where I got my last car several years ago. And the entire staff at this car place is black. It never occurred to me to go, it never once entered my mind to go to a place where the majority of the people, the employees, or all of the employees were white. Instead, I went back and I was thinking, God, I hope this is the guy that sold me my last car. And he not only did he sell me my last car, but I took my ex-girlfriend there when she needed to sell her car. They bought her car, and he was helpful there. And I was thinking, man, I hope this guy's there. In fact, if I wasn't worried about doxing, I'd give him a 5-star rating, a recommendation right here now in this video. Never entered my mind to that oh, maybe a white person would do it better, or that I would rather be around someone of my own ethnic group or something like that. That never entered my mind. I don't think the same way that Robin DiAngelo does. Now, Robin DiAngelo's thought process constantly factors people's ethnicity to the exclusion of all other factors. My factoring right there in that situation was I got great service, great treatment, a great deal last time, and I want to go find those guys and repeat that same experience, and it looks like we're going to have the same quality of service this time. Car I'm looking at looks great. The car I'm leaning towards looks great. So that's the difference. No, not all people think the same way as Robin DiAngelo. And not all people think the same way as Robin DiAngelo, and the fact that that alone is the basis for how she interprets the world should give you more cause to stop and think about Robin DiAngelo than it does about the entirety of the race. Now, I can prove that the first paragraph of what you said is complete bupkis just by trying to unpack what you said there. You said that all white people are racist. However, there is such a thing as an anti-racist that is not racist, or an anti-racist person. So what you're arguing, because Robin DiAngelo is a white anti-racist, but she's also racist, there is such a thing as a racist anti-racist. This is a semantic impossibility. And what you do to try, what the so-called anti-racists do to try to eat their cake and have it too, is to say, oh, well, we acknowledge our privilege and we acknowledge how privileged we are and blah, 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 all of this stuff. Well, so basically, you're a racist that their concept of being anti-racist is to be a racist that feels shitty about being racist. This kind of white masochism does not do, and that's a term that, as far as I know, I coined, but white masochism, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't help anything. A bunch of white people going around flagellating people does not help blacks in any way, shape, or form. White people kneeling down and praying for forgiveness from blacks is not helpful to those blacks in any way, shape, or form. And since I so often see it occurring in the Christian church, it is also a form of idolatry. And washing their feet is not helping anything, except maybe to give those people that were prayed to a sense of entitlement. But at the end of the day, no so-called anti-racist will say, I am, followed by that word. They will not describe themselves as racist. I challenge you to do it, Gina. Again, I'm assuming you're a white woman. based on the white drawing in your ID picture. Um, if that's the case, if you are a white person, a white woman, I challenge you, get on camera and declare yourself to be a racist. You won't do it because you know on a fundamental level that that word does not actually have the meaning that you and Robin DiAngelo want it to have. Now, I'm sorry, the baby wanted attention. But anyway, I want to get into this comment that you keep making about how certain things are straight out of the Nazi playbook and all of this. And the extraordinary irony, I assume that what you mean by straight out of the Nazi playbook is that these are things or actions or behaviors or opinions that were consistent with those widely held or widely understood to be held by National Socialists, or actions that were carried out by National Socialists under Hitler and that kind of thing. So, let's stop and think about something for a minute. We just saw, and I'll put a link in the crotch bar, we just saw up in Seattle a bunch of so-called woke progressive people mobbing outside of the houses of white people with megaphones saying that, demanding that those people come out, give up their homes, and surrender their homes, their property, to black people. And I'll put a link in the crotch bar for that. But that occurred. So, it is very common knowledge that one of the things, one of the central aspects of Nazis during Nazi action during World War II was to seize the property of Jews, demand that Jews surrender their property and either be vacated to ghettos or later put into concentration camps. I mean, even the location, the Wannsee Conference, which was where the conference where the final solution was determined and implemented, that conference occurred in a mansion that was seized from a Jewish owner. And what you are doing, the actual actions that the woke are doing right now, are highly indicative of the actions taken by Nazis. We're not talking about an appearance of perspectives that might seem to align. We're talking about actual actions, and actions speak a hell of a lot louder than words. So, I want to make something very clear. We are not talking about. I'm not drawing any kind of parallel between what Jews have encountered throughout the persecution Jews have encountered throughout history and the vague irritation that white people are encountering right now. These two things do not even equate in any way, shape, or form. But it is important to draw a connection between the similarities of these actions. That the actions that you are seeing taken by the people in Seattle who demanded that white people surrender their homes to black people, by the mobs of angry protesters that threatened and demanded people put up their fists in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. These are the actual kinds of actions that you see resulting from the philosophy that was embraced by the Nazis and the philosophy that's being embraced by the woke left. Because here's the thing, Gina, look at what you actually said in your actual post. You have this conception of white people as secretly running the world, controlling all of the wealth, this, that, or the other. All these examples, these are literally the same canards, the anti-Semitic canards that were levied at the Jews to justify Nazi action. Well, what did they say? That they controlled an inordinate amount of the world's wealth, that they were secretly working the mechanisms of power to benefit themselves, that they were that they were, responsible for ruining the economies of the world, and that they were responsible for all of the world's wars. All of these accusations, those are literally the things that were levied at the Jews in World War II, and it's not because there's any truth about them when they're said about Jews. It's not because there's any truth about them when they're said about white people or black people or Asians or Indian. It's just very simple. It's a simple understanding. There's a saying, mass movements don't require a god, but they do require a devil. The and what you're seeing when you hear those comments, when they're made about any group of people, most people will not hate other people. They don't just say, if you say, hey, let's go hate that guy, they won't join you in it. Most people don't want that kind of conflict. They don't want that. They don't want to deal with that. But it's a real easy way to get people to start hating other people. If you say, hey, you see that guy over there? He's got money that's supposed to be yours, and he won't share it with you because he doesn't like you. That's a real easy way to get people to start hating each other. And that is exactly what you exhibited in your comment. Now, understand before I continue down this train of thought that the only reason I'm using this Nazi/anti-Semitism example thing here is because you brought it up, and I feel like it's necessary to kind of analyze what's going on here. So, and also, by the way, my ultimate point here, if you'll bear with me, my ultimate point is going to be that hatred and prejudice and bigotry are wrong all across the board, no matter who they are applied to. Gay, straight, black, white, Jewish, Asian, Indian, Hispanic, Latino, whatever, Canadian, whatever, all across the board, it's wrong. Without question, it's wrong. And nothing I say is going to contradict that. I want you to stop and think about something. Yaron Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute, who is himself Jewish, talks about some of the origins of anti-Semitism, and one example that he talked about was that throughout history, Jews were permitted to loan money to Gentiles at interest. They were not permitted to loan money to other Jews at interest. So they could not charge interest on a loan made to another Jew. So this is an example of something that does not sit well with people. And it happened. I mean, there's no question that this was reality. It didn't sit well with people. Now, my response to that would be, if they want to do that, that's their business. Tough shit. So I'm on the side of them being allowed to do that if that's what they want. But that did not sit well with a lot of people. That really pissed a lot of people off, and you can make an argument that it caused tremendous economic disparities, that it took advantage of people. You could make a lot of arguments that this was something that was done to benefit one group to the exclusion of another group. In history, and we're talking about things that happened thousands of years ago, but it's even documented in the Old Testament that Jews owned slaves. That happened. That was wrong then, just as it was wrong when white people owned slaves. So, why these examples? There are these historical precedents of Jews doing things that have pissed people off, that have been even crimes against humanity. Those things exist. So why is it wrong to punish the Jews that were living in the 30s and 40s in Germany for those things? Because they happened hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And it is a fundamental concept of justice that we don't inflict the crimes of one generation onto the next generation. And that actually, by the way, is something that is brought up in the Old Testament. The Jews were philosophical innovators of that concept, that you don't visit the sins of the father onto the next generation. But that is a fundamental concept of justice. And go look over in North Korea, for example. Michael Malice writes about this, for example, as a citation. In North Korea, if you are convicted of a crime, 3 generations of your family, up to 3 generations, pays the deficit of your crime. They suffer. They are punished. You're punished up to 3 generations. So your grandchildren will still be, they are born guilty of, if they're not born yet, they're born guilty of the crime that you started with, or that you committed. If you're in a work camp in North Korea and you commit suicide, as a deterrent to that, to you committing suicide, they will again they will put your workload onto your family up to 3 generations. It is a fundamental act of human injustice to demand that subsequent generations shoulder the guilt of things that previous generations did. And you probably see where I'm going with this. Yeah, I think that it is fundamentally unjust to say that people today are responsible for or should bear responsibility, should bear guilt for things that happened under the U.S. slave trade, under the British colonial slave trade that preceded it and precipitated it. That they should bear responsibility for things that happened under segregation. Now, you might be tempted to say, well, we're talking about things that happened thousands of years ago versus things that happened a couple of generations ago. As Louis C.K. said, slavery was 140 years old. 2 old ladies, that's how old slavery is. Okay. So my question to you then is, where does it stop? What is the morally acceptable degree to which guilt, collective guilt, should be vested upon people across generations? That is my question to you. How many generations of white people have to pay the deficit for what happened under slavery? How many generations of Jews have to pay the deficit for what happened in Old Testament slavery? It's ridiculous. It's wholly, is 1,000 generations okay? Is 10 generations, 1 generation? How many? You need to figure this out. Because until you can stop taking collective guilt and paying it forward, as long as we're operating off of that, we're always going to be at each other's throats. We're never going to be able to get past any of this. There's a comic strip, a Doonesbury comic. I've mentioned this before, but I think it's great. It's one of the characters, if it's I think it's Roland is his name. It's one of the reporters. It's not Rick Redfern, but anyway, one of the reporter characters in Doonesbury. No, it's Beatty. That's besides the point. But anyway, it's Beatty. Beatty is embedded in Iraq, and he's in a car with this Muslim soldier who says, "We can't drive by that house. Somebody in my family was harmed by someone in that family, and if we drive by there, I'll be honor bound to go in and kill them." He says, "Okay, we'll go this way." So they go that way. And he says, "So when did that happen?" He says, first he says, "So you have to kill people if you drive by their house and someone in their family's harmed someone in your family?" He says, "Yeah, I'm honor bound to kill them." He says, "Well, when did this happen?" And the guy says, 1347. And Beatty says, "What is wrong with you?" And that really is the point. I mean, that really does. When we are talking about things that are things where no person who is alive today committed an act against any other person that's alive today, we are paying guilt forward across the generations. Now, don't get me wrong. I think reparations and justice are great when it's the exact people that harmed the exact people, or it's the exact people that did the harm making penance to the exact people who did the harm, or who were harmed, excuse me. The Japanese internment camps during World War II, those people, there's a reasonable argument to say those people should be compensated by the actual government that harmed them. The actual people that were harmed are compensated for their harm by the actual government that harmed them. That makes sense. That's the balancing of the scales. That's Lady Justice. But when we go down the road of people who are not responsible, who are generations removed from the people who are responsible, when we start persecuting on that basis, that's the end of society, man. It's funny. I was actually once talking to, I don't want to go into details because I don't want to specify who the other person is or anything like that, or even indicate who they might be. But I was talking to a white woman one time, not a public figure, not anyone you would have heard of, a white woman one time who, this was the day after the Rayshard Brooks shooting, And so that it came up on my phone while we were talking, so I was talking, why I mentioned it. She gets off on this tangent, just disdaining white people. And at one point she said, and I quote, "I fucking hate white people. They just use all their money to cheat at everything." And this statement was made by a white woman who was living in a very nice condominium that her dad was paying for. So it's just very strange to me where these attitudes come from. But what I'm trying to get across to you, Gina, the reason I took time to make a half-hour video or however long this is because you need to realize that you are not exempt from the kind of prejudiced thinking that has brought about horrible things like the Holocaust, that has brought about horrible things like slavery, that has brought about horrible things like genocide and prejudice and hate. I'm not saying you're the doo-doo head. I'm saying you have the potential to be the doo-doo head. We all do. And it's important to stop and think about that. Now, it is true that Jews do well financially as a culture. It is true that white people on the whole do well financially as a culture. It's true that Asians also do well financially as a culture. And other groups, Indians, also encounter this. And it is not their ethnicity or any kind of structural prejudice favoring their ethnicity. It is one thing and one thing alone, and it's the one thing that you, I am certain, are really prejudiced against. Capitalism. Capitalism is what produces wealth. And as one person, a public intellectual that I admire, who I will not quote because if I do you will stop listening, but as that person once said, yes, capitalism produces inequality, but it also produces wealth. All the other systems just produce inequality.